Jin-Ho adjusted the atmospheric scanner in his cramped research module at the edge of Outpost Sigma. Rain pelted against the dome above him, creating a steady drumming sound that usually helped him focus. But today, his mind wandered. 6 months on this remote planet had begun to wear on him. The same tests, the same readings, the same empty skies. The scanner beeped suddenly, pulling Jin from his thoughts. He frowned at the display. An unusual energy signature appeared at the edge of his detection radius, flickering in and out like a candle in the wind. "That's not right," he muttered, adjusting the settings to sharpen the reading. The signature wasn't matching any known phenomena in the database. Jin opened a communication channel to the main outpost. "Control, this is Research Module 3. I'm picking up an anomalous reading in Sector 17. Requesting permission to investigate." After a moment of static, a bored voice responded. "Negative, Module 3. Storm front moving in. All field operations suspended until morning." Jin glanced at the weather readout, then back at the energy signature. Whatever it was weakening. "Control, this could be important. The signature appears to be degrading. Orders stand, park. Stay put." Jin stared at the scanner for a long moment. The signature continued to fade. With a quick decision, he closed the communication channel and reached for his field gear. "Sorry, Control," he said to no one as he pulled on his environmental suit. Technical difficulties with the comm system. The rain had grown heavier by the time Jin navigated his terrain vehicle out of the research module. Visibility was poor, but his scanner guided him toward the mysterious signal. The dense forest of purple-leaf trees closed in around him as he traveled deeper into unexplored territory. After 20 minutes of careful navigation through increasingly difficult terrain, Jin's vehicle could go no further. He continued on foot, the scanner clutched in his gloved hand. The energy signature was now stronger, pulsing with an almost lifelike rhythm. Jin pushed through a thick stand of vegetation and stopped short. Before him lay a clearing that hadn't been there yesterday. Freshly broken trees surrounded a deep gouge in the earth, at the end of which sat what could only be described as a spacecraft. The vessel was unlike any human design Jin had ever seen. Sleek and organic in appearance, it reminded him of a seed pod. Its metallic surface shimmered with faint iridescence despite being half buried in mud. "Unbelievable," Jin whispered, approaching cautiously. The craft had clearly crash-landed, with a significant breach in its hull. Jin's training kicked in as he scanned for radiation or other hazards. Finding none at dangerous levels, he moved closer and peered into the damaged section. The interior was dimly lit by a soft blue glow. Jin activated his suit lights and climbed carefully through the opening. The space inside was surprisingly spacious, with curved walls covered in what appeared to be living circuitry. At the center of the main chamber lay a figure. Jin's heart raced as he approached. The being was humanoid but clearly not human. Slender with delicate features, the creature had skin that seemed to shimmer with subtle patterns of light. Jin recognized the species from his xenobiology studies, a Nari, one of the reclusive beings from the Cygnus system who rarely ventured beyond their own worlds. The Nari appeared female in form and was clearly injured. A deep gash across her forehead leaked silver fluid, and her breathing came in short, ragged gasps. The patterns of light beneath her skin flickered weakly, like a failing power system. Jin knelt beside her, medical training overriding his amazement. "Hello? Can you hear me?" The Nari's eyes fluttered open, large, pupilless orbs of swirling violet. She recoiled from Jin with a soft cry, her skin flashing bright patterns of what could only be alarm. Jin raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "It's okay. I'm here to help you." The alien tried to move away but winced in pain. More silver fluid seeped from wounds Jin hadn't initially seen. Her vessel's crash must have been violent. Jin slowly reached for the medical kit attached to his belt. "I'm a scientist. A doctor of sorts." He kept his voice calm and even. "You're hurt. Let me help you." The Nari's eyes darted between Jin and the medical kit, then to the damaged ship around them. After a moment's hesitation, she relaxed slightly, though the light patterns beneath her skin continued to pulse rapidly. Jean carefully examined her wounds, using his scanner to assess her biology. The readings confirmed she was indeed Nari, a species known for their bioluminescent communication and advanced biotechnology. They were also known for avoiding humans whenever possible. "I need to stop this bleeding," Jean explained, even though he wasn't sure she understood. He applied a healing gel to her worst wound, watching carefully for any adverse reaction. To his relief, the silver fluid began to coagulate. The Nari watched him work, her expression unreadable but her skin patterns shifting to slower, more regular pulses. When Jean finished applying temporary bandages, she reached out and touched his hand lightly. Her skin was cool and smooth, and where she touched him, the patterns of light seemed to flow briefly onto his own skin. Jean felt a strange sensation in his mind, not quite words, but impressions. Gratitude. Fear. Urgency. "Your ship is badly damaged," Jean said. "And you need better medical attention than I can provide here." Outside, thunder rumbled closer. The storm was intensifying. Jean made a quick decision. "I'm going to take you to my research module. It's not far. We can treat your injuries properly there." The Nari hesitated, then nodded slightly. Jean helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as she swayed unsteadily. She was lighter than he expected, almost weightless in the planet's gravity. Before leaving the ship, the Nari pulled away from him briefly. She pressed her hand against a panel on the wall, which responded to her touch with a series of light patterns. A small compartment opened, and she withdrew a crystal-like object that pulsed within her light. She clutched it tightly to her chest, then returned to Jin's side. The journey back to the terrain vehicle was slow and difficult. The rain had turned the ground to mud, and the Nari grew weaker with each step. By the time they reached the vehicle, Jean was practically carrying her. As he secured her in the passenger seat, the Nari's eyes met his. Her hand reached up and touched his face gently. Again, Jean felt impressions in his mind: danger, pursuit, secrecy. "Someone's after you?" he asked. The Nari's skin flashed a pattern that somehow conveyed affirmation. Jean nodded. "Okay. We'll figure that out later. First, let's get you somewhere safe." As the terrain vehicle moved through the darkening forest, Jean glanced at his unlikely passenger. The outpost had strict protocols about first contact scenarios, none of which involved bringing aliens home. He would face serious consequences for his actions. Yet looking at the injured being beside him, Jean knew he'd made the right choice. Something important had literally fallen from the sky into his life, and nothing would be the same again. The Nari watched the alien landscape pass by, her violet eyes reflecting the lightning that occasionally illuminated the forest. The crystal in her hands pulsed in rhythm with the lights beneath her skin, telling a story Jean couldn't yet understand. Jean Ho's research module hummed with activity as he worked frantically to stabilize his unexpected guest. The injured Nari lay on his examination table, her luminescent skin pulsing with weak, erratic patterns. He had transformed his small living quarters into a makeshift medical center, pushing aside furniture and research equipment to make space. "You're going to be okay," Jean said, more to calm himself than the alien. He wasn't sure she understood his words, but his tone seemed to soothe her. Jin's xenobiology training had never prepared him for treating an actual alien. The Nari were known to be highly private, rarely allowing other species to study their physiology. Everything he knew came from limited scientific literature and second-hand accounts. The most pressing concern was the silver fluid leaking from her wounds. Jin's scanner identified it as a substance similar to human blood but with properties more like liquid crystal. He applied a synthetic coagulant, praying it wouldn't cause a reaction. The Nari watched him work, her large violet eyes following his every movement. When Jean finished bandaging the worst of her injuries, she reached out and touched his hand. Immediately, patterns of light flowed from her skin onto his, creating a strange tingling sensation. Images flashed through Jin's mind: a beautiful world with two suns, tall crystal structures, then chaos, fire, and fear. The connection broke as quickly as it had formed, leaving Jean dizzy and disoriented. "That was incredible," he gasped. Some kind of direct neural communication? The Nari's skin pulsed in what seemed like agreement. She pointed to herself and made a soft, musical sound. Mina, she said, the word flowing like water. Mina, Jean repeated. I'm Jean. His communication device chirped loudly, making Mina flinch. Jean grimaced as he recognized the priority alert code. Jean Ho Park, Director Yoon's voice filled the small room, tight with controlled anger. Report to command immediately. Your unauthorized field excursion has been noted. Jean looked at Mina, then at the communication device. Acknowledged, Director. I'll be there shortly. He turned to Mina. I have to go, but I'll be back soon. You'll be safe here. He pointed to the door lock controls. This will keep anyone from entering. Mina's skin flashed with what Jean interpreted as anxiety. She clutched the crystal she had brought from her ship tightly against her chest. I promise I'll return, Jean said, mimicking the motion of coming back with his hands. Director Yoon was waiting when Jean arrived at the command center, her face a mask of professional disappointment. Explain yourself, Park. You directly violated orders by leaving your module during a storm warning. Jean took a deep breath. Director, I detected an unusual energy signature and found a crashed spacecraft. There was an injured pilot, Anari. Silence fell over the command center as the other scientists stopped their work to listen. Anari? Here? Director Yoon's expression shifted from anger to disbelief. Where is this alien now? In my research module. She's injured and needs medical attention. Director Yoon's eyes narrowed. You brought an unidentified alien into our outpost without authorization or quarantine procedures? Her injuries were severe, Jean said defensively. There wasn't time for protocols. This is a serious breach of security, Yoon snapped. The Nari have made it explicitly clear they want minimal contact with humans. Having one in our outpost could cause a diplomatic incident. So we should have left her to die? Jean countered. Director Yoon sighed. Of course not. But there are procedures, Jean. For everyone's safety. She activated her tablet. I'm sending security to your module. The alien will be moved to the medical bay under quarantine. Jean felt panic rise in his chest. Director, please. She's frightened and injured. Moving her now could make her condition worse. This isn't a debate, Yoon said firmly. And you're officially on probation pending a full review of this incident. When Jean returned to his module, he found 2 security officers waiting outside. Inside, the medical bay team was preparing to transfer Mina, who was pressing herself against the wall, her skin flashing rapid patterns of distress. It's okay, Jean said quickly, moving to her side. They're going to help you. Dr. Kim, the outpost's chief medical officer, approached cautiously. The Nari's biological readings are unlike anything in our database, she told Jean. I'll need your observations to establish a baseline for treatment. As the medical team prepared Mina for transport, Jean noticed her crystal had begun to pulse with increasing intensity. He wondered what it meant but had no time to investigate as they moved her to the medical bay. Hours later, Jean sat beside Mina's bed in the quarantine section of the medical bay. Her condition had stabilized, but communication remained difficult. Dr. Kim had brought in a linguistics specialist named Tae who was attempting to develop a translation algorithm based on the patterns of light in Mina's skin. Her bioluminescence appears to be a secondary form of communication, Tae explained. The patterns correlate with emotional states and possibly conceptual information. Jean nodded. When she touched me, I saw images, memories, I think. Tae looked intrigued. Direct neural communication through physical contact? Fascinating. Mina had been watching their exchange with interest. She raised her hand toward the clear barrier separating her from the humans and pressed it against the surface. Her skin began to glow in complex patterns. I think she wants to communicate, Jean said. Tae adjusted his algorithm. The computer is picking up consistent patterns. If I'm interpreting correctly, she's trying to tell us something about. He paused, frowning. Danger? Pursuit? Jean remembered the impression he'd received earlier. Someone's after her. Maybe that's why she crashed here. Director Yoon entered the medical bay, her expression serious. We've received a transmission from a Nari vessel. They're demanding the return of their wayward citizen. They'll arrive in 3 days. Jean felt a chill run down his spine. Did they say why they want her? They claim she stole classified research, Yoon replied. They were quite clear about the consequences if we don't cooperate. Inside the quarantine room, Mina's skin had gone pale, the light patterns fading to a dull glow. She's afraid, Jean said quietly. Director, I don't think we should hand her over without understanding what's happening. Yoon's expression softened slightly. I agree. But we need to know more. Try to communicate with her, find out why she's here and what that crystal is. Over the next day, Jean spent every available moment with Mina. Tay's translation algorithm improved steadily, allowing for basic communication. Through a combination of the translator, gestures, and occasional direct contact, a story began to emerge. Mina was indeed a scientist, researching interspecies communication. She had discovered that Nari were not as biologically different from other species as her people claimed. In fact, her research suggested ancient contact and possibly even interbreeding between Nari and other species, heretical ideas in her strictly isolationist society. They want silence, Mina managed to convey through the imperfect translator. Truth dangerous. The crystal? Jean asked, pointing to the object she kept close. Proof, she responded, her skin flashing with what the translator interpreted as determination and fear. As they worked to bridge the communication gap, Jean noticed other changes. Mina began to mimic human gestures and expressions. She started to form simple words in his language. And sometimes, when their hands touched through the special contact ports in the quarantine barrier, the connection between them seemed to grow stronger. On the evening of the second day, as Jean prepared to leave the medical bay, Mina pressed her hand against the barrier. Her skin glowed with a pattern he had come to recognize as a request for contact. Jean placed his hand against the special port. Immediately, the now familiar sensation washed over him, but this time with greater clarity. He saw Mina's home, her laboratory, the authorities discovering her research, and her desperate flight. But beneath these images was something deeper, a growing trust and connection between them that transcended their biological differences. As the connection faded, Jean knew with certainty that he couldn't let Mina be taken back to face punishment for seeking truth. Somehow, he had to find a way to protect her. I'll help you, he promised, the words unnecessary as she had already sensed his resolve through their connection. Outside the medical bay, the night cycle had begun. The outpost was quiet except for the distant rumble of thunder. In just over 24 hours, the Nari vessel would arrive, and time was running out. Jean entered the medical bay early the next morning, carrying a small package. The night shift doctor gave him a curious look but said nothing as he made his way to Mina's quarantine room. After 2 days of observation, the medical team had determined she posed no biological threat, and security protocols had been relaxed. Good morning, Jean said as the door slid open. Mina sat cross-legged on her bed, her skin glowing with soft blue patterns that brightened when she saw him. She had learned several human words and phrases, though the translation device remained their primary means of communication. Jean, she said, her voice musical and light. Morning. He smiled and unwrapped his package, revealing a small device. I brought something to show you. Mina leaned forward with curiosity. Jean activated the device, and suddenly the quarantine room filled with a holographic projection of Earth's night sky. Stars twinkled around them, with constellations highlighted in soft colors. This is my home system, Jean explained, manipulating the projection to zoom in on a bright point of light. Earth. Mina's skin rippled with fascination. She reached out, her slender fingers passing through the holographic stars. Then, with deliberate movements, she adjusted the controls herself, searching. Home, she said finally, pointing to a star cluster Jean recognized as part of the Cygnus constellation. Can you show me your world? Jean asked. Mina nodded, her skin patterns changing to something Jean had begun to recognize as concentration. She carefully manipulated the star map, zooming in on a binary star system with 5 planets. The third planet glowed with beautiful blue-green light. Home, she repeated, her tone now tinged with sadness. Jean watched as she projected images from her memory into the hologram, showing crystal cities that caught the light of twin suns, forests of luminescent vegetation, and oceans that glowed with bioluminescent life. It was breathtakingly beautiful. Why did you leave? Jean asked gently. Mina's skin darkened to a deep purple. She touched her crystal, which responded by projecting its own holographic images. Jean saw DNA sequences, comparative biological analyses, and historical records. My people, she explained through the translator, believe we are separate. Special. Must stay pure. Her frustration with the limited vocabulary was evident. She touched Jin's hand, initiating their direct connection. Images flowed between them more clearly now, Mina discovering ancient evidence that Nari had once freely interacted with other species, even finding genetic markers suggesting interbreeding. Her excitement at the discovery, then horror as her research was declared heretical. The government confiscating her work, her desperate decision to flee with her evidence. They would destroy truth, her thoughts came through clearly. Destroy me. When the connection broke, Jean found himself blinking back tears. Your people would rather hide the truth than accept it. Yes, she said simply. Fear different. Jean thought about humanity's own history of fearing difference. Many humans are the same way. But not all of us. Throughout the day, they continued sharing their worlds. Jean taught Mina about Earth's diverse cultures, showing her images of great natural wonders and human achievements. She absorbed everything eagerly, asking questions that revealed a brilliant scientific mind. In turn, Mina taught Jean about Nari science and culture. Their technology was based on biological principles rather than mechanical ones, with living components integrated into everything from buildings to spacecraft. Their society valued harmony and consensus, but this had evolved into rigid conformity that stifled new ideas. Your science, she said, indicating Jin's tablet, different path. Interesting. As they talked, Jean couldn't help noticing how her movements had become more human-like, while he had begun to interpret her light patterns instinctively, sometimes before the translator processed them. They were adapting to each other. In the afternoon, Dr. Kim came to check on Mina's recovery. The wounds were healing rapidly, silver scars already forming where the deepest injuries had been. Remarkable regenerative capabilities, Dr. Kim noted, reviewing the scans. Your people have incredible biological technology. Mina's skin glowed with modest appreciation. She pointed to a small device she had fashioned from materials Jean had brought her. Help explain, she said. The device projected a detailed 3-dimensional model of Nari physiology, highlighting how their light-producing cells connected directly to their nervous system. Dr. Kim was fascinated. This could revolutionize our understanding of bioluminescent communication. With your permission, I'd like to study this further. Mina nodded, her skin flashing with what Jean now recognized as pleasure at sharing knowledge. After Dr. Kim left, Jean checked the time with growing anxiety. The Nari ship will arrive tomorrow morning. Mina's glow dimmed noticeably. They take me back. Punishment. What would happen to you? Jean asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. Mina made a gesture of finality. Truth-seekers who challenge elders. Her skin darkened to near black. Not allowed to continue. Jean felt cold anger rising within him. Execution, then. Yes, she confirmed quietly. Mind first. Then body. Jean paced the small room. We can't let that happen. Maybe I can convince Director Yoon to grant you asylum. Mina's expression showed doubt. Through their growing connection, Jean sensed her fear wasn't just for herself. Your people threatened consequences, she said. What kind of consequences? Mina's skin displayed patterns Jean hadn't seen before. Warning, danger. Nari technology powerful. Can disable your systems. Make demands. Jean understood the implications. A small research outpost would be defenseless against advanced Nari technology. Refusing their demands could endanger everyone. As evening approached, they were interrupted by Director Yoon's arrival. Her expression was grave as she entered the quarantine room. "We've received another communication from the Nari vessel," she said without preamble. "They're accelerating their approach. They'll arrive by midnight, not morning as previously stated." Jean felt panic rising. "Director, we need to talk about this. Mina isn't a criminal, she's a scientist being persecuted for her discoveries." Yoon's expression softened slightly. "I understand your concern, Jean. But this is bigger than one individual." The Nari representatives made it clear that refusing to cooperate would be considered an act of aggression. "They'll kill her," Jean said bluntly. Yoon looked at Mina, who stood with quiet dignity despite the fear evident in her dimmed luminescence. "Is this true?" the director asked her directly. "Yes," Mina replied simply. "My research threatens order." Director Yoon was silent for a long moment. "I need to consider the safety of this entire outpost. I'm sorry, but I don't see that we have a choice." After she left, Jean sat beside Mina in silence. The connection between them had grown strong enough that words weren't always necessary. He could sense her resignation, her sadness, but also her determination that her discoveries not be lost. "Jean," she said finally, taking his hand. "Thank you. For saving. For understanding." The touch initiated their deepest connection yet. Jean felt not just her thoughts but her emotions, her fear giving way to something warmer, more personal. He realized with sudden clarity that what had grown between them was more than scientific curiosity or even friendship. "I'm not giving up," Jean promised. "There has to be a way." As night fell across the outpost, distant sensors detected the approaching Nari vessel. Time was running out, but Jin's mind was already racing with the beginnings of a plan. He would need help, and he would be risking everything, his career, possibly even more. But looking at Mina, seeing the light patterns that now seemed as expressive to him as any human face, he knew some things were worth the risk. Jean raced through the dimly lit corridors of the outpost, his heart pounding. The emergency lighting cast long shadows as he made his way to the small engineering section where his friend Q worked the night shift. He had less than 3 hours before the Nari vessel would dock. "I need your help," Jean said without preamble as he entered the engineering bay. Q looked up from his console, surprised. "Jean? What's going on? Everyone's talking about the alien ship coming." "They're coming for Mina, and they'll kill her if they take her back." Jin's voice was urgent. "I can't let that happen." Q's expression grew serious. "What are you planning?" "Something that will get us both fired, I'm guessing." "Probably worse than fired," Jean admitted. "But I can't stand by and watch them execute her for pursuing scientific truth." Jean quickly explained his plan. They would need to disable the outpost's tracking system temporarily, access a small maintenance shuttle, and create a diversion during the handover ceremony. It was risky and would almost certainly end Jin's scientific career, but he saw no other choice. Q listened silently, then sighed. "You really care about her, don't you? Not just as a scientific curiosity." Jean nodded. "She's brilliant, brave, and being persecuted for seeking truth. Wouldn't you do the same?" After a moment's hesitation, Q turned to his console. "The maintenance shuttle in Bay 3 has just developed a mysterious fault that will require it to run a full diagnostic cycle. That should keep it off the official roster until you need it." "Thank you," Jean said, relief flooding through him. "Don't thank me yet. You'll need medical supplies, and I can't help with that." Jean had already thought of this. "I'm going to talk to Dr. Su." She seemed sympathetic to Mina's situation. As Jean had hoped, Dr. Su agreed to help prepare specialized medical supplies for Mina's unique physiology. With careful timing, she would place them in the maintenance shuttle during her regular inventory rounds, avoiding suspicion. With less than an hour remaining, Jean returned to the medical bay. Two security officers stood outside Mina's room, their expressions solemn. Inside, Mina sat perfectly still, her skin glowing with subdued patterns that Jean now recognized as resigned acceptance. "They're preparing for the transfer," Jean said quietly as he entered. "Director Yoon will formally hand you over to the Nari representatives." Mina nodded. "I understand. Your director protects her people." "We're not surrendering yet," Jean whispered, careful to keep his voice from carrying to the guards. He quickly outlined the escape plan, watching as Mina's skin began to glow with hope. "Dangerous for you," she said, concern evident in her luminescent patterns. "Worth it," Jean replied simply. Their conversation was interrupted as Director Yoon entered, accompanied by Dr. Kim. "The Nari vessel has begun docking procedures," Yoon announced. "We will proceed to the main hangar in 15 minutes. She looked at Jean with suspicion. "Dr. Park, your presence is not required for the transfer." "With respect, Director, I've established the strongest communication link with Mina. I should be there to ensure nothing is lost in translation." Yoon seemed about to object, but Dr. Kim intervened. "Jin's right, Director. The Nari communication patterns are complex, and he's developed a remarkable ability to interpret them." After a moment's consideration, Yoon nodded curtly. "Very well. But this is a delicate diplomatic situation. Follow protocol exactly." The main hangar was brightly lit and crowded with outpost personnel. The massive airlock doors were already cycling, preparing to connect with the Nari vessel's docking tunnel. Jean stood beside Mina, trying to appear calm despite the anxiety coursing through him. Mina looked different now. She stood tall, her posture formal and her skin glowing with steady, dignified patterns. Only Jean could see the subtle flickers of fear beneath the composed exterior. "Remember," Jean whispered. "When the lights flicker, move toward the service corridor." The airlock completed its cycle with a loud hiss. The inner doors slid open to reveal three tall Nari figures. Their skin glowed with bold, authoritative patterns that sent ripples of distress through Mina's own luminescence. The lead Nari stepped forward. Unlike Mina, whose features had a certain delicacy, this individual projected strength and authority. His skin flashed with patterns that even Jean found intimidating. "I am Elder Soren," he announced through a translation device. "I come to retrieve the criminal Mina, who has stolen sacred knowledge and fled justice." Director Yoon stepped forward with formal courtesy. "I am Director Yoon of Earth Science Outpost Sigma. We have provided medical care to the individual in our custody and will release her to your authority as requested." The elder's attention fixed on Mina, his skin flashing with patterns Jean interpreted as anger and disgust. "The criminal will return for judgment. Her actions threaten the purity of our people." Mina's skin responded with patterns Jean had never seen before, defiance mixed with determination. "Truth is not criminal," she said in her own language, which the translator rendered for all to hear. The elder moved closer, towering over Mina. "You will be silent. Your mind will be cleansed of these dangerous ideas." Jean felt cold anger rising within him. The elder's threat confirmed everything Mina had told him about her fate if returned. Director Yoon, sensing the tension, stepped forward. "Let us proceed with the formal transfer. We have prepared." At that moment, the hangar lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Emergency lighting came on seconds later, casting everything in a red glow. Alarms began to sound throughout the outpost. "Station systems experiencing unexplained power fluctuations," announced the automated voice of the outpost's computer. "All non-essential personnel please return to quarters." Confusion erupted in the hangar. Jean grabbed Mina's hand and pulled her toward the service corridor as planned. They had nearly reached it when Elder Soren's voice cut through the chaos. "The criminal escapes. Stop them." One of the other Nari raised what looked like a ceremonial staff. The end began to glow with intense energy. Jean realized with horror that it was a weapon. "Jean!" Mina cried out, pushing him aside as a burst of energy shot from the staff. Gene felt searing pain as the edge of the energy beam caught his shoulder. He stumbled, clutching the burned flesh. Mina helped him through the service door, which sealed behind them with a reassuring click. "You're injured," Mina said, her skin pulsing with patterns of distress as they hurried down the narrow corridor. "I'll be fine," Gene gasped, though the pain was intense. "We need to keep moving." Behind them, they could hear pounding on the service door. It wouldn't hold for long. They reached Bay 3 where the maintenance shuttle waited, its systems already powered up thanks to Q's preparations. Jin's vision began to blur from the pain as they climbed aboard. "Can you fly this?" he asked Mina, gesturing weakly at the controls. Mina's skin flashed with determination. "Different, but similar principles. I will learn quickly." As she examined the controls, Jean activated the emergency launch sequence that Q had programmed. The bay doors began to open automatically. An alarm sounded as the outpost's security system detected the unauthorized launch. "Warning, unauthorized shuttle departure in progress. Security teams to Bay 3. Jean slumped into the co-pilot's seat, his strength ebbing. The pain from his shoulder wound was spreading through his chest. Something was wrong, the energy weapon had done more damage than he'd initially thought. Mina worked the controls with surprising skill, her fingers dancing across the unfamiliar interface. The shuttle lifted off just as the service door at the far end of the bay burst open. Elder Soren and several security officers rushed in, but they were too late. The small craft shot through the bay doors into the darkness of space. Jean saw the massive Nari vessel looming above the outpost, its sleek design reminiscent of Mina's crashed ship but far more imposing. "They will pursue," Mina said, her voice tense as she navigated away from the outpost. Jean tried to respond but found he couldn't speak. The pain had become overwhelming, and darkness was creeping in at the edges of his vision. Mina turned to him, her skin flashing with alarm as she saw his condition. "Jean! Stay awake!" He wanted to reassure her, to tell her everything would be all right, but no words came. As consciousness slipped away, the last thing Jean saw was Mina's beautiful face above him, her skin glowing with patterns he now recognized as something far deeper than concern. It was the same pattern that had been growing in his own heart. Jean floated in darkness. Distant voices came and went. Cool hands touched his skin. Sometimes, he felt patterns of light flowing through him like gentle currents. Pain would rise and fall like tides. When Jean finally opened his eyes, he found himself in a small room with curved walls that pulsed with soft blue light. He lay on something between a bed and a medical pod. His body felt strange, lighter somehow, and when he moved his right arm where the energy weapon had struck him, there was no pain. "You wake," came a familiar musical voice. Jean turned his head to see Mina sitting beside him. Her skin glowed with patterns he now recognized as relief and joy. But something was different about her. She seemed more confident, more at ease. "Where are we?" Jean asked, his voice raspy from disuse. "Safe place," Mina said, helping him sit up. "Edge station. Free colony. Many species here." Jean looked around with growing wonder. The room's architecture was unlike anything he had seen before. Organic yet precisely structured, with living circuits running through transparent walls. "How long?" he asked. 7 days, Mina replied. "You were badly injured. The Nari weapon disrupted your cellular energy." "I had to." She hesitated, seemingly searching for the right words. "Adapt you." Jean felt a flutter of alarm. "Adapt me? What does that mean?" Instead of answering directly, Mina took his hand. Jean gasped as he saw faint patterns of light move beneath his own skin, nothing like Mina's luminescence, but definitely not normal human biology. "I used Nari medical technology," she explained, her expression anxious. "To save you. Had no choice. The damage was spreading to your heart." Jean stared at his hand, watching the subtle play of light beneath his skin. He should have been terrified, but somehow, it felt right. "You saved my life," he said simply. Mina's skin brightened with relief. Was afraid you would be angry. Changed you without permission. Jean shook his head. How could I be angry about still being alive? He carefully swung his legs over the edge of the bed. Can I walk? Yes, but slowly. Your body still adjusts. With Mina's help, Jean stood and took a few tentative steps. His balance felt different, as if the gravity was slightly wrong. When they reached a window, Jean stopped in amazement. Outside was a view unlike anything he had ever imagined. Edge Station hung in space at the boundary between two star systems. Its structure was a marvel of engineering, part mechanical, part biological, with sections that clearly represented different architectural styles from various species. Ships of all shapes and sizes moved around the station like fish in a cosmic sea. This is incredible, Jean breathed. I've never heard of this place. Not on official maps, Mina explained. Independent colony. Refuge for those who seek freedom. Scientists, artists, thinkers from many worlds. How did you find it? Not my first escape, Mina admitted with a flash of what Jean now recognized as her version of a smile. When researching forbidden knowledge, good to know safe places. A soft chime sounded, and the door to their room slid open. A being entered that Jean initially couldn't categorize, neither human nor Nari, but with features that seemed to blend several species. Their skin had patches of luminescence similar to Mina's, but their body structure was more robust, almost human-like. Good. Our patient awakens, the being said in accented but clear human language. I am Dr. Taro. How do you feel, Jean Ho Park? Different, Jean replied honestly. But surprisingly good. Taro nodded. Mina's quick action saved your life, though the treatment was unconventional. The cellular adaptations appear stable. With time, you will adjust completely. As Taro examined him, Jean learned more about what had happened after their escape. The maintenance shuttle had barely outrun the Nari vessel, but Mina had managed to send an emergency signal to Edge Station. A fast patrol ship had intercepted them, bringing them to safety while jamming the Nari tracking systems. Your director Yoon has reported you as missing, presumed dead, Taro informed him. It is safer that way, for now. The news hit Jean harder than he expected. His life, his career, his identity all gone in an instant. My family will think I'm dead. Mina's skin dimmed with sadness. I am sorry. My presence brought this pain. Jean shook his head. It was my choice, Mina. I couldn't let them take you. After Dr. Taro left, Mina helped Jean dress in clothing that seemed designed for comfort while accommodating his changed physiology. They left the medical section and ventured into the public areas of Edge Station. Jean was overwhelmed by the diversity around him. Beings from at least a dozen different species moved through wide corridors filled with plants and flowing water. Some he recognized from scientific records, others were completely unknown to him. Many showed signs of genetic adaptation or hybridization. The station authorities have granted us refugee status, Mina explained as they walked. Your knowledge of Earth science is valuable here. And my research. Her skin brightened with excitement. My research is welcomed. They entered a large open laboratory space where several beings of different species worked together. In the center was a holographic display showing complex genetic sequences, the data from Mina's crystal. Here, I can continue my work, she said. These scientists understand its importance. Jean watched as Mina explained her findings to a small group of researchers. Her movements were confident, her light patterns clear and strong. She was in her element here, her brilliance recognized and valued. One of the researchers, a tall being with iridescent scales, approached Jean. You are the human who helped Mina escape. We are in your debt. Her research could change everything. What exactly is her research? Jean asked. She has discovered that most spacefaring species share certain genetic markers, evidence of ancient contact or common origin. The Nari government suppresses this because it contradicts their doctrine of genetic superiority and isolation. Jean watched Mina with growing admiration. She risked everything for the truth. As did you, the researcher noted. Few would make such sacrifices for someone not of their own kind. Later, as they shared a meal in a quiet corner of the station's dining area, Gene found himself studying Mina with new eyes. In the week he had been unconscious, she had adapted to life on Edge Station with remarkable ease. She had found purpose again, colleagues who respected her work, and freedom from the oppressive doctrines of her home world. "You seem happy here," he observed. "Yes," she agreed, her skin pulsing with warm patterns. "But also worried for you. You lost everything because of me." Gene considered this. He had indeed lost his old life, his position at the outpost, contact with his family and friends, his place in human society. Yet sitting here, watching the stars through the massive windows of Edge Station, he felt strangely at peace. "Not everything," he said finally. "I found something too." Mina reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. Where they touched, light patterns flowed between them, creating a bridge of understanding deeper than words. "What will you do now?" she asked. Gene looked around at this remarkable place where differences were celebrated rather than feared, where knowledge was pursued without political constraints. He thought of the subtle light now flowing beneath his own skin, a permanent connection to Mina and her world. "I think I'll stay here," he said. "Continue my research. Maybe help with yours. There's so much to learn." Mina's skin glowed with joy, the pattern spreading until her whole being seemed illuminated from within. Without the need for words or even touch, Gene understood what she was feeling. It mirrored what had been growing in his own heart since that rainy day when he had found her crashed ship. Outside the station windows, a small ship departed, its engines flaring bright against the darkness. New arrivals approached from distant stars. And in between the Edge Station hung like a beacon, a place where different worlds could meet, not in fear, but in understanding. Gene and Mina watched the stars together, their futures as bright and boundless as the universe before them.